Hey, welcome back to another video. I'm Ivan Calderon, and today we're going to be looking at some of the new features in Studio One 5. Okay, so Studio One 5 dropped last week, and there were a bunch of new things that were added, so I thought in this video, we could take a dive and look at some of those new additions. Now, 3 things before we get started. There are over 70 new features in this new update, so for the sake of time, I will not be going over all of them today. Studio One 5 is the version that I am currently on now, so as I do more videos in the future, I'm sure we'll cover all of them at some point, but for this video, we will only be going over the big showcase front page features. Second, I do have my own personal thoughts and opinions regarding this update, and I will give them to you at the end, but just know that I'm also currently working on another video that'll be highlighting some of the things that I wish I would have seen in this update as a producer, so stay tuned. Finally, and for the sake of full transparency, I did receive this copy of Studio One 5 for free by PreSonus. However, I am not being paid to make this video, and as always, all thoughts are my own. But okay, without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay, so let's start off with the new mix scenes. One of the biggest advantages to working within the digital domain is that it is much easier to recall mixes, and all that basically means is that it's easier to go back and change things if you need to. Now, what I used to do for the longest was after every mix revision, I would save that mix as a new file using the save as function here, and basically all that meant was that if there were 3 revisions, I would end up with 3 separate mix sessions. In Studio One 4, we got introduced to a new way of handling this, and that was with save versions, which basically allowed you to save a snapshot of your current mix along the way to make it easier to come back at any point. Well, in Studio One 5, we have yet another way to recall mixes, and those are mix scenes. Now, mix scenes are very similar to the save versions feature that we got in Studio One 4, but now they are within Studio One, within the software, which makes them number 1, visual, and number 2, a lot easier to switch between versions. So if you open up your mixer and go to the bottom left, third button from the top here, you're gonna open up the brand new mix scenes window. Here you can set your recall options, which basically tell the software what you want it to remember within each mix version, whether that be visibility, volume, pan, mute, and so much more. Now, once you have your options selected, mix as usual, and when it's time to export, just make sure you save it as a scene first by clicking this plus button here at the top. If you get new revisions later on in the future, then it's as simple as doing those changes, implementing those changes, saving it first as a new mix scene, exporting it, and then continuing that way until the client is happy. So here in front of me, I have a beat pulled up, and obviously you can use this with whatever. It works with songs too. But let's say, for example, that this is a beat mix that I'm doing for somebody, and let's pretend that this is a finished mix. So I'm gonna go over to the mix window. I'm gonna hit the plus button, and I'm gonna call this mix number 1, and save. From here, I would take this version, export it, and send it over to the client. Now let's pretend that they had some revisions. They wanted me to say, for example, lower all of the drums. So I'm gonna lower all of the drums. And maybe they also wanted me to remove all of these plugins because they didn't like it. They hated all of it. So we're gonna do that. Once you do your changes, before you export, hit save mixing, or hit the little plus button rather. We're gonna call this mix number 2, and hit save. From here, if you ever need to go back to mix number 1, it is as simple as double clicking on that mix scene. And as you can see, it brought all the volume back up for the drums, and it brought in all those plugins that I removed. Now, an important thing to remember again here is that any changes that are being recalled are gonna be dependent on whatever parameters you have set here at the bottom. So make sure these are to your liking first. Now, my favorite part about the mix scenes is that you don't have to recall the entire mix if you don't want to. Say, for example, that the client comes back and they say, you know what? I actually like all those plugins from the first mix, but I like the volume for the drums of the second mix. Can you put them together? Now, before, this could have been a little bit tricky, but with the new mix scenes, it's really simple. Now, the first thing you wanna do is go over to the bottom here where you have your parameters and check the selected channels only box. From here, we want to keep the volume of the drums that we included in the second mix, but we also want the plugins from the first mix. So what we're gonna do is first select that channel that we want to recall, and it's as simple as double clicking on the first mix scene. As you can see, the volume for the drums of the second mix stayed in place, but we were able to recall the plugins for that plug from the first mix. So as you can see, mixing just got a whole lot easier within Studio One. Moving on, the next new feature is the Listen Bus. The Listen Bus is basically a second output on the mixer that can be used to send a feed of the mix to different locations. As long as you have enough inputs and outputs on your interface and the proper routing, one of the most common scenarios and uses for this would be to send a copy of the mix through the Listen Bus to the control room, and then a separate mix through the main outs over to the artist's headphones. What's really awesome is that you could also solo any sound and have that be sent to the control room via the Listen Bus while leaving the artist's mix through the main outs completely undisturbed. To be able to do any of this, first make sure to enable the Listen Bus by heading over to the wrench icon on the top left here on your mixer, dropping that down, going all the way to the bottom to where you see the Listen Bus category, and then check off the boxes for Enable Listen Bus and then solo through Listen Bus. Now again, the first option here enables the Listen Bus, and you can already see it here pop up on my mixer window. It's right next to the main out, while the second box allows you to solo a source and have that source be sent to the Listen Bus while the main out is completely undisturbed. Now, once your Listen Bus pops up like this, then all you have to do is just select where you want to send this feed. Now, this for me will be specifically useful whenever I'm recording artists here in the studio, because often when we're recording, the artist naturally wants to hear the music along with their vocals to record appropriately. However, as a recording engineer, maybe I just want to listen to the vocal alone so I can see and hear if something needs to be re-recorded and make those decisions quickly. Now, the other thing you can use the Listen Bus here is for audio analysis and room calibration plugins. If you have something like ARC, you can place it here and be able to hear how it's affecting your mix while maintaining the original mix unaffected. Okay, the next new feature is the new clip gain envelopes. So this is a super useful feature for audio editing, and basically what it does is allow you to adjust the gain of an audio wave in a super efficient and easy to use way. To enable this feature, first go over to the clip you want to affect. So for me, it'd be this one here. Right click it and hit gain envelope. Now, as soon as you do this, you're gonna notice that you get a brand new line in the middle of the audio wave here. And from here, all you have to basically do is create points in between the area that you want to manipulate. So for me, let's say for example, that this is way too loud, this little area, then I'm gonna make a point here and here. And once you're at this point, you can either bring the gain up or down to your liking without having to make any additional cuts. Now, this is useful for a bunch of different scenarios, but as you just saw, it is particularly useful with vocals whenever you have, say, like a pop or a click, or just an area like this that might have been too loud. With this new feature, you can quickly and efficiently fix these issues and keep it moving. Now, a little pro tip for you here, if you wanna do this even quicker, what I'd suggest you do is go over to your transform tool, which you can find under this drop-down menu. So click on that, and then basically just highlight the region you want to affect, and then bring that up or bring it down. No need to make any points. Next up on the list, we have the brand new score editing. So PreSonus has long had its own software for musical notation called Notion, but we have never been able to do musical notation within Studio One itself. To bring up the new notation window, simply add a MIDI track and add an event. I already have a bunch here on the timeline, so I'm just gonna open one by double clicking it. Once you do that, you're gonna bring up the piano roll, and to access the score editor, all you have to do is go to the top left here, to where you see this treble clef, and click on it. What's really awesome about this feature is that you can work exclusively from this page if you wanted to by adding your notes and your modifiers, or you can program your VSTs like normal and at any moment switch back to this window to see those notes reflected with notation. As you can probably already tell, this feature is going to be amazing for anybody who composes music with virtual instruments, because now you can program and get that performance in notation all in one place. The only caveat is that at the moment, this feature can only really be used to program parts and then say have a musician come in to read those notes and re-record with a real instrument. At the moment, there is no way to export this notation out to a PDF to send out, but I wouldn't doubt if that came in a future update. Moving on, we have improved native plugins. So this one is a smaller update, but as someone who appreciates a good GUI, I am glad to see that these native plugins have finally caught up to everything else aesthetically. So I'm only gonna run through a couple, but if I bring up the EQ and the limiter, you'll see that things have a brand new look, and just in general, things are better placed to make more sense. Now, there are a few native plugins that have been outfitted with some new features like the EQ here, for example, which now has the brand new phase linear low cuts along with some input and output metering. So again, smaller feature, but it's nice to see these plugins get some love. Next on the list, we have the new AUX channels. So AUX channels are really nothing new to the audio world, but they are new somewhat to Studio One. Now, we haven't really needed AUX channels in Studio One before because Studio One handles the routing for buses internally. So basically in most other DAWs, whenever you wanted to group together or route a group of tracks, a group of channels to one channel, say for example, if you wanted to process them together, you would have to first create an AUX channel and then use buses to route those channels to that AUX channel. In Studio One, however, whenever you want to group sounds to one channel, all you really have to do is select them, right click, and then hit add bus for selected channels. Now, as I mentioned, whenever you do this, Studio One automatically handles all of the routing internally, and in the end, it spits out the output of those sounds, so in my case, it'd be this here, into the input of the newly created bus, and it's so much easier to do. Now, technically, this newly created channel is an AUX channel, but unlike a traditional AUX, you cannot add inputs from your audio interface. The inputs are strictly restricted to the sounds that you sent to that AUX. In my case, it would be these drums here. Well, with that being said, in Studio One 5, we now get a traditional AUX channel, so let me show you how it works. Creating an AUX channel is as simple as right-clicking on your mixer and then going down to where it says Add AUX Channel. Once you do that, you'll see the channel pop up and you are ready to go. Now, one of the reasons you might want to use an AUX channel is, for example, if you wanted to route any external audio source into the Studio One mixer without cluttering your session with another track. To do this, you would simply just plug in your external audio sources into any available inputs of your audio interface and then add that as an input for the AUX channel here, and you're done. You could even mix it here by adding plugins if you choose to. Now, these new AUX channels won't replace the old way of busing in Studio One because that is still a lot easier to do. These new AUX channels are intended primarily to help you route external sounds into Studio One, and that could be useful for multiple different reasons. Another cool way to use these AUX channels here is to also map them directly to external MIDI instruments like synths and workstations, and what this ultimately means is that you no longer have to sequence in one track and record in another. What's also cool is that once you have everything set up, you can save any external device's instrument under the external devices folder and access it at any time. So in the end, once it's all set up and saved, you can go into your external instruments folder and then drag and drop any external device into your timeline and have Studio One automatically create a MIDI track and a mapped AUX channel, which makes using your external devices, your external synths and workstations just as easy as using a VST. Now, as mentioned, I do not have any external devices to demo this with. However, Gregor from Presonus, who's actually a Studio One product specialist, he did 2 amazing videos on this topic and he walks you through the steps. So I'm gonna link those videos for you down below. Moving on down, the next new feature is the new marker window. Now, this is another really small feature, and personally, I don't use markers like that, but if you're someone who does, then let me show you how this works. Now, in previous versions of Studio One, we've had this handy arranger track that you've probably seen me use to arrange my beats before. You can actually already see it in this session because I've already pulled it up. It's this one here. But whenever you select this track and then hit the inspector window, you're gonna get a drop down version of this track that you can then use to, add more sections or just move things around. Well, in Studio One 5, you now also get this same feature, but for markers. Now, to get to this window, the first thing you have to do is open up the marker track, which you do that by hitting this little flag button here. And once you do, simply open up the inspector window, hit the marker track, and now you get that drop down kind of view where you can add markers and rearrange as you see fit. Okay, next up on the list, we have the new visual key switches. Okay, so there's a bunch of virtual instruments out there, and especially ones that are modeled after and recorded from orchestral instruments that come with these things called key switches. Key switches basically allow you to switch between different expressions and articulations within that instrument to make the performance sound more realistic and dynamic. So then using key switches would allow you to switch between playing legato notes to staccato notes on a trumpet, for example. Now, these key switches are usually mapped to certain keys, so you could either switch between them on a live performance by triggering those notes, or if you were programming that VST, you had to scroll all the way to the bottom to the notes where the key switches were mapped to and program a note there to activate that expression. Now, there's nothing particularly wrong with the way things were done now, or rather before, but with Studio One 5, we have a brand new way to work with key switches that just makes it so much easier. Now, the new way to work with key switches is to use the key switch window. Now, to bring up that window, you first have to have a VST that comes with key switches, but given that you have one of those, load it up and open up the piano roll. From here, go to the bottom left and press this little plus button to open up the performance controls. This is the area where you have always been able to manipulate your modulation and velocity, among other things, but now you see that we have a brand new option called key switches. Now, instead of having to scroll all the way to the bottom and program different notes there, you can do it all from this key switch window. So to demo this, I have a chord progression here on Presence XT, and this is one of their nylon patches. So alone, unaffected, it sounds like this. Now, at the moment, these are being played with an open expression, but if I wanted to change the way they are played, I can simply go over to the key switch window, double click, and select a new expression. So let's do dead, so dead strings. And now it would sound like this. Now, I can also mix this up and add a different expression if I wanted to. So let's double click again. Maybe I want some slides, and maybe I want that to start, yeah, right here. So now we get this. As you can probably already tell, you can still place those notes on the piano roll to activate that expression, but this just gives you another option to work. All right, last but not least, we have the brand new show page, and this is probably the biggest addition to Studio One 5. Now, this page is extensive, so I'll only be giving you an overview, but this is kind of like Logic's version of Main Stage, where it gives you the ability to perform your songs live. But okay, to get to the show page, there's a couple different ways you could do it. You could do it from the start window, so once you open up Studio One, just select New Show, and that'll bring you to that page. Or if you're already working on a song, you can go to the top right here and click on Show. Now, as soon as you hit that button, you'll see that you get options for different kinds of templates, and you can select these depending on what you're doing, but for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to hit Empty Show. Now, once you're here, you're gonna notice that the layout has three main areas. The set list, which is where all your tracks will populate, and you can even fill in info here regarding the show's venue and artist. The player section, which we'll talk about in a minute, and finally the main sequencer area here. So the way this page works is that you add tracks on the set list area by clicking first on this little plus button. From there, you can name the track whatever you want. So I'm just gonna name this track 1, and you'll also see that this populated in the main area here in the middle. Now, in this set list area, you could even designate whether you want the show to stop at the end of every track, if you want it to continue, or if you want it to loop. Now, once you have your tracks loaded up in the set list area, the next step is to add what Presonus is calling players. Now, you add players again by clicking this little plus button, and they can either be a backing track, a real instrument, or a virtual instrument that you already own. You also have the option to assign macros to different controller buttons and faders to be used live during the performance. In any case, once you have everything set up and everything is ready to go, you simply go to the top here to where it says perform, hit that button, and start your show. Now, I myself don't perform, but a lot of people do, and a lot of the artists that I work with do as well. What really excites me about this feature as a producer is that as long as the artist that I'm working with also uses Studio One, I can easily prepare a performance version of any track that we're working with that they can then take to wherever they want and perform live. Speaking of which, another really cool feature here is that you can export a song or parts of a song to a show page directly from the production session for a quick integration. And you do that by first opening up, of course, the production session and then going over to song and then add to show. Now, those are some of the biggest features that came with Studio One 5, but there are a couple honorable mentions. Number 1, Studio One can now be controlled or linked to external devices using MIDI timecode. Number 2, we now have support for Melodyne 5, which is great because as we know, Studio One has always been really good with integrating with Melodyne, so it's good to know that the latest version is now fully supported. Number 3, Studio One Artist 5 no longer requires any additional add-ons or purchases to have third-party VSTs work. Now, all of that works natively with your purchase. And finally, there's a thing called Presonus Sphere now, which is basically Presonus's monthly subscription service that gives you access to Studio One 5 Professional, all of their plugins and sounds, cloud storage, and even a collaboration and social space, all for one monthly fee. Okay, so my thoughts. So Studio One came with a lot of great new additions and features, but but not enough of what I would have loved to see as a producer. Now, I know that at face value, that might seem like a complaint, but it's not. See, I'm predominantly a producer, so I'm always looking for ways for new features that can make my production process a lot easier. Now, there's a lot of great features here that can be used with production, but it is clear that this version was specifically geared to or focused towards mixers, editors, composers, and live performers. Although it might be upsetting at first to not get what you wanted, we have to remember that PreSonus is making a DAW for everyone, not just one specific type of person. They're not just making a DAW for producers or for mixers, they're making a DAW that everyone can use, and that takes time to implement. So even though I didn't specifically get what I wanted from this update, this ultimately makes me happy because every single feature you saw here were top requests from the community, which ultimately means that PreSonus is always listening to their consumer base. Now, I know people get really excited about big number updates like this, but we also have to remember that PreSonus delivers on even half updates. So it's just a matter of time before we get some of the things that I would really love to see. Now, as mentioned in the beginning, I do have another video coming that will specifically state some of the things that I wish to see in a future update to Studio One 5, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this update? Do you think it's worth it? Are you getting it? And if so, what are your favorite features? Let me know in a comment down below. But that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. If this video was helpful to you, then let me know by leaving a comment down below. But as always, like this video if you like to subscribe if you're not already, but I'll see you on the next one.